Introduction to the Via Dolorosa, and let me remind you that the Via Dolorosa is not going to be a historic walk, but rather a liturgical. Are we okay with the word liturgy? Liturgical memory of Jesus' suffering and execution, burial, and resurrection. Why is that? Why it happened this way? Now, I would like you to look at this historically, please. Remember that Jesus historically was here in Jerusalem, and there were people that remembered Jesus. It was a community of the Jewish people that became followers of Jesus, and they made a community in Jerusalem. And remember who was the head, the bishop of that community, maybe? James, brother of Jesus. For a while, he was the head of that community. However, remember, soon after Christ, the Romans broke into the war, or the Jews broke into the war with Romans, and Jerusalem was destroyed. And most of the people were killed, and those who were not killed were expelled. So the Jewish Christian community of Jerusalem stopped to exist historically. Right? And that's why we should be thankful to the plan of God that sent Paul with a mission to the non-Jews. And that's where this is where the church developed. It developed outside Israel. And only 300 years later, when Constantine converted the empire into the Christian empire, the Christianity comes back to Jerusalem. But notice this thing. It's not coming back as the Jewish Christian venture, but it comes back as the Gentile Christian community with the Gentile Christian tradition rather than the Jewish Christian tradition. And it's no one to blame. It's just the way it developed. It's the way it developed. And that is why the Byzantine Christians started to build monuments in order to remember what happened to Jesus, but they started to do that in their own way, or based on their own tradition, that not necessarily would have something to do with reality, because the people that would physically remember Jesus are gone a long time ago. Am I clear on this one? And so this is how their tradition developed. And plus, remember that the majority of the Christians at that time, when it becomes, it's converted. The empire converted into Christianity, sometimes forcefully converted. Right? The people are forcefully converted to become Christian. And most of the population, most of the people that are Christians, they are illiterate. They don't know how to read. They don't know how to write. So in order to educate them, in order to give them an idea what was going on with Jesus, what is necessary, because they don't know how to read it right. Pictures, and I would say broadly maybe liturgy. That gives them every year a circle of the same events, and people would remember, right? They would get into remembering certain things. Again, there's nothing bad with this. We think that liturgy is bad. There's nothing bad with it. As a matter of fact, when the Christian liturgy started to be developed, the Christians took a pattern from another group of people that already had liturgy. That's the Jewish people. The Jews had liturgy all the way. And so they started to take patterns from the Jews. I'll give you an example of liturgy. What is the most famous Jewish liturgy? What do you know that the Jews do every year? Passover. Sure thing. This is a Passover festival that the Jews do every year. What do they remember in Passover? Exodus, right? The Exodus story. This is what the Passover is all about. Remember the Exodus story. Are the Jews required to go to Egypt and follow the footsteps of Moses? No. Why not?
Too hot.
It's too hot. Too far, and it's not practical to go. See, you have to spend 40 years to do that. So it's not practical. It's just period not practical to do that. So you remember it in a different way. And what is the most Jewish thing to do? Is to eat. That's right. That's what the Jewish mother is for. Eat in a certain way. You eat in a certain way, right? To remember there are certain elements of food that you're familiar with that will remind you of the Exodus story that happened in there. So this meal can happen in America, it can happen in Russia, it can happen anywhere. Doesn't matter where you are. You celebrate at a certain date, and you celebrate by eating in a certain way. So that's what the Jews did. So the Christian liturgy oftentimes would imitate something very similar. They would remember certain events that took place in Jesus' life, and we have the church split into two divisions: Western division and Eastern division, right? The Western division was the capital in Rome, and the Eastern division in the capital of Constantinople. So that's how the church split. Why is that? Geographically, the empire split, and linguistically, language. West is Latin, East, Greek. Yep, two different. All right, so you're probably more familiar with the Latin version because you're from the West, you're not from the East. I'm more familiar with the Eastern version because I'm from the East, not from the West. And in the West, the church developed, in order to remember this particular period of time of Jesus, what we celebrate as Easter, resurrection, which is truly the most important thing in the whole New Testament history. 14 stations of the cross, right? That's the 14 stations of the cross. Were developed by the Catholic Church. The Eastern Church, for example, the Russian Church, do you know how many stations of the cross the Russians have? 0. No stations. They just did not develop the idea of per se stations of the cross. They have their own liturgy, which is very long. Boy, I was invited once. You can't sit there, you have to stand almost the whole night. Oh, the Russians suffer for you guys. They suffer every year. And they were, the Russians all over. That's why they were good. And so, by the way, it's in the old Slavonic language that no one understands. Just like in Latin, right? If you do that in Latin, nobody will understand unless you learned it before, ahead of time before you. And the Latin Church developed 14 stations of the cross, and that is to remember certain elements that happened, certain events that happened when Jesus was going from the place where he was condemned, but when he's brought to the place of execution. And we will pass those traditional stations. And station number, let's see, 3 remembers how Jesus fell under the weight of the cross. Where do we remember about it? From the Bible, from the text, that Jesus fell when he was carried. Fine. Station number 5, we'll remember Simon of Cyrene. Remember what the guy did?
Carry the cross.
He helped to carry the cross. Okay. By the way, he was Jewish. He came from the era called Cyrenaica, which is Libya. Today, there was a big Jewish community there. What was he doing in Jerusalem at this time? Passover celebration at a temple. It was in a temple, or preparing for the Passover. And you might be interested in station number 6 that remembers Veronica. Anybody would know who Veronica is? Was?
The image of their face.
That's exactly right. She was a woman who was in a crowd, just like Simon was. And when Jesus was suffering, carrying the cross, she washed his face with the piece of cloth, right? And the image, right? And the image of Jesus's face imprinted on the handkerchief, on the piece of cloth. Where do we read about this?
I don't know, I never have.
Because you don't. It's not in the Bible. See, it's not in the Bible. It's in a tradition. It's in a tradition, it's in a Catholic tradition, but it's not in the biblical text. Is it bad or is it good?
Okay, down in the text, it's not true.
It's both. It's both.
One of,
You say it's a Jewish way of saying it. One becomes a
but two, it's bad because it's not actually
Okay.
verifiable.
All right, okay, let me give you an example of the Jewish liturgy, of the Passover that we mentioned before. Who saw this, been participating in this, ever? Anybody? 1, 2, 3, 4, Passover Seder?
Yeah.
Okay, can I quiz you real quick? Easy question. Remember when you were sitting at the table, there was a special, when the Jews celebrated Passover, there's a special seat that nobody seats.
Yes.
Seat of Elijah. In other words, there's a seat that is prepared, nobody sits there, and it's prepared for Elijah to come.
Yes.
And why is that? Why Elijah is supposed to come? What's his business? Why would he should come?
To prepare the way.
Right, but what is he supposed to do? We prepare a seat for him in order to do what?
To announce.
To announce what? The Messiah. That's exactly right. His job is to declare, to announce, to herald the Messiah. That is why the disciples of Jesus asked Jesus very plainly, where's Elijah? He's supposed to come in order to announce the coming of the Messiah and point out to the Messiah, this is the Messiah. All right, remember what was the answer Jesus said? Well, this is John the Baptist. All right, okay. But if you look at this element, historically and chronologically, remember at the Passover celebration, we celebrate the Passover, which happened when? 3,400 years ago. Roughly 3,400 years ago in the days of Moses. Okay. When did Elijah live? 9th century BC. 500 years later. So what is this Elijah fellow doing in our Passover story? He's not there. He's not been born. 500 years he's not been born in this story. So why would we take Elijah into the story? It has nothing to do with Elijah. Nothing to do with Elijah. And yet, we have a connection. It's not a chronological connection, but it's a theological connection. Because what is all this Passover celebration is all about? What is it all about? It's about the redemption. God's redemption of the Jewish people from the bondage of Egypt. That is a redemption story. And that's why Elijah will fit into redemption story, because what is the grand finale of the redemption story? That's the Messiah. That's the Messiah. And that's why we need Elijah to announce the coming of the Messiah. So we bring Elijah in to the Jewish Passover, despite of his not being chronologically in this period. If I'm clear on this one, that's why in the Christian tradition we do the same thing with Veronica's story. We don't have a historical record of Veronica, but we have a theological connection. What is the theological connection? The act of mercy. What she did was the act of mercy. And that's a positive thing, that's a good thing, that's a wonderful thing. All right, so that's why we remember Veronica, and that's why there are certain elements in the Catholic tradition, for example, that are not mentioned in the Bible. From that perspective, they put it in. All right, so that's how the Christians celebrate the Easter. But remember what happened to the Christians here that were living here after Constantine? They were conquered by the Muslims in the year 638. Since the year 638, this country is under the Muslim domination for a very long time, until basically 1970, with the exception of 100 years of the Crusaders' rule. Right? It's a Muslim country. And that's why Christianity again shifts back to the non-Jewish territory. And the center of Christianity becomes what?
Rome.
Moscow. Oh, you didn't know that? But this is what my Russian friends keep telling me. They are Orthodox. In other words, it's a right worship. The word orthodoxy means right worship. In other words, you guys are all wrong, and they are all right, because they have a right worship. That's what they say. The Christianity moved to Constantinople, and then Constantinople was conquered by the Turks, and the only stronghold of Christianity is in Moscow. And I'm sorry that you didn't know that. But see, that's, again, it shifts anyway, whether it's Rome or Moscow or whatever else, it shifts outside the realm of the state of Israel. And Muslims, all Muslims here for a long time, very, very few Christians. Very, very, very few and insignificant. And the Christians are started to come back in the middle of the 19th century. The middle of the 19th century, for example, this monastery was built at the middle of the 19th century because the Western Christians are again seeing interest in the land of Israel for various reasons. And because they started to come back here, they started to build monasteries, they decided to reenact the Stations of the Cross that they're familiar from Europe. They're familiar with this tradition of the stations, and they decided to do what? They decided to put them in Jerusalem in the 19th century. Okay? In which way? So they build their churches and they see which street is available to bring them to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And they declare this street in the 19th century to be what? The Via Dolorosa. Because it's just technically possible to walk every Friday in a small procession to the Via Dolorosa, to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. All right? So the traditional street that we're going to take today is been established in the 19th century and not in the days of Jesus. But it doesn't matter for the Christians that are walking on this Via Dolorosa every Friday, because for them it's not a historical reconstruction, but a liturgical memory of what happened to Jesus. Am I clear on this one? And that is to justify the fact that I will not stop at every station of the 14 stations. Because we're not a Catholic group, and I'm not a Catholic priest, I'm not familiar with the Catholic liturgy. And there is one, the Catholic priest would have a book of prayers, and they will do certain prayers at every station, which will be appropriate for such and such station. But because you see, our goal is rather historical reconstruction than liturgical reconstruction. So that's why we will not do that. And I will try to show you just little bits, tiny little bits of history that is still visible. One is here, that's why we're here. We're here for two reasons. A little bit of history and clean restrooms. We'll see a little bit of
Church are we in right now?
it's called the Sisters of Zion Church, the Sisters of Zion Church. What we'll do, we'll see a little bit here, and we will visit shortly the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, we'll drive to the Garden Tomb, that is Sepulchre Tomb. And then we'll go to the Garden Tomb, where we will have a communion. Now, why we have a communion in the Garden Tomb? Because in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, we will not be allowed to have communion. Right? Not be allowed to have communion in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. I know it's a little hard for friends, so that's why what we're going to do now, we're going to go down. We're going to go down